FCAT just gave us the high sign, ladies and gentlemen. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Sunderland Board of Selectmen. We are actually going to call to order from an adjournment. We started this evening off in executive session. It is the beginning of the discussion of the police chief's contract. So we met to exchange some of our proposals, and now we're back in open session. That was a 6:30 posting. We're going to start tonight with a conversation with our friends from Leverett about joint fire services. It's kind of an interesting timeline, interesting timing. With respect to joint services, as we've gone through the South County EMS over the last 2.5 years, effectively. This is an interesting opportunity for discussion with another neighbor. But before we actually get going, Tom's going to read a little bit from the annual report of
1919.
1919, where Leverett was at the first town meeting in Sunderland. No.
We're part of the town.
Might be a little earlier than 1919.
What we try to do is we kind of go back and read some of our old town minutes and town meetings, and this I thought was an interesting thing. We're talking about schools and school budgets and all that kind, and this comes out of the 1919 annual report, officers and committees of the town of Sunderland. This is concerning school lunches, and see if it sounds familiar. Many children bring to school insufficient lunches with resultant undernutrition, leading to mental stagnation or irritability. Mrs. Elise Crocker, the cooking teacher, is making an effort to serve hot cocoa at cost to all pupils who wish it. There is certainly more nourishment in a cup of cocoa made with milk than in 2 or 3 cents worth of cookies. This many times is actually the only luncheon the children have. No luncheon is provided from home, but the pennies are given them to go to the store for cookies. Wow. That was 1919, wow. And we think things have changed. We're still talking about a lot of the same things, and that's been very, in our readings, that's one of the common themes that we see. Things really don't change.
The circle.
Big circle.
Yeah, we revisit them. Great point. We've got Chief Ahern with us from Sunderland. At the table, smiling faces. I'd like to ask if you could go down, starting with to the left of Margaret, and just introduce yourself, who you are. You're being broadcast live. We bumped polka time off for this show, so make it good.
I'm Margie McGinnis, the administrator in Leverett.
Thanks so much.
I'm Rich Brazzo. I'm the chair of the Leverett Selectboard.
Very good. Thanks, Rich.
Julie Shively, Select Board.
And Peter DeRico, Select Board.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you all coming. Anybody else from Leverett?
Yeah, we have a committee. This is our.
Nice.
It's our
Let them
fire study
introduce
committee.
themselves too. That's
There you
our
go.
fire study committee.
Thanks, Fire Study
Or
Committee,
a
for
portion
showing
of
up.
Okay, well, Judy's the chair. I'm Dean Alfonso. I'm a member of the committee. Judy's our chair.
Judy Weinthaler. Barbara Tyner.
Stuart Olson, Deputy Fire Chief, 11.
Well, thanks everybody for coming, and as it is a discussion around a study, maybe one of you could start with kind of a 101 of what the study pointed out, the history of how you maybe got to the study.
I'd like to have Judy.
Yeah, great. And then we'll have the conversation.
Well, there's been issues in Leverett, as there are have been in all towns. It's the same issues no matter what you read. Difficulty recruiting, difficulty retaining budgets, et cetera, part-time call force. So in about December of, well, what year, 13 it would have been?
Maybe 12.
No, 12.
20, yeah.
December of 12, after discussion, things had been in the works for a while, but the select board appointed a committee, so we actually started our work that January. And we took January till the following August, September to really pull together a report that looked at what had happened before, the demographics of Leverett, trying to get an assessment from some of the needs. We had another firefighter on the force. We talked to various organizations. We met with Sunderland. We met with Shutesbury, talked to other places, and then pulled together information about what our needs were, and then made recommendations. And among them was to consider a full-time firefighter, because one of the needs is, like all towns, we don't have the daytime coverage. Firefighters either most don't work in town. I think there was one that the chief was sometimes available during the day. work out of town, and it's not just that, but they don't have, Stuart's a teacher, one person is a psychotherapist, can't just leave. And so we had that daytime coverage and felt that even one full-time person, since close to 50% of our needs, and again, this is the same statistic everywhere, were medical in nature, that even one person there could make a huge difference in response time. But we also took a look at other options and what was happening in the state. We were in touch with FERCog and where they were going with their study, and looked at other ways for cooperation in terms of training, compatible equipment, other duties of the fire department in terms of inspections, a range of things. We also felt that that it would be good for recruitment to keep trying to recruit, but that the fire department, given that they are a call force and the chief is only part-time, that's asking a lot. So we recommended that there be a citizen committee to really support in that effort, since the town tends to benefit from it. Help me out. I think that's pretty much, and that the town continued to do exactly what we're doing here, of exploring options with neighboring towns, and I think the whole county has come a long way. I think the FERCog was focused a lot on apparatus and but they're moving to the next stage, and they're talking. And if you look at some of the surveys from all the chiefs, at least the ones that responded, everybody's coming up with the same needs. And I think everybody's beginning to see we have to think outside the box. We got to do something, a little bit different, because each little town can't be a silo. Did I miss anything?
I think the only thing that we could add is just that the particular constituency of our department has a couple of people, basically 3 senior people, including the chief, just nearing retirement.
Okay.
So it was a good time for us, both from the big demographic issues, but also from the in-house changes that are going to happen one way or the other, that we decided we ought to look at all of that together. And so we were happy to find out that you all are at least open to talking about some of this stuff.
One of the major driving forces, thank you, Peter, how could I forget that, is that we're going to be losing a lot of experienced people, not just bodies.
Right.
But we're going to be losing very experienced bodies. Stuart is the training officer. So, and then other people are great and they're coming along, but as you know, it takes many years to reach full level of competency. So.
That makes perfect sense. Well, I appreciate the 101. We read the report from Leverett, not so much the COG report. I wonder, you had mentioned their focus on equipment, assets, essentially assets. Did the COG spend time on training, recruiting? Did you find those areas in line in the 2 reports? Not really. Okay.
No, it was almost like wouldn't you say, Stuart, kind
Inventory?
of an inventory
Okay.
of who has what.
Okay.
And there was some, what your staffing patterns were, et cetera.
Yeah.
Some identification of needs, what?
Qualifications of firefighters.
Okay.
Yeah, but there is, they did get that follow-up grant to begin to look at how departments can cooperate and begin to look at cooperative staffing
That makes sense.
and kind of the next step.
Tom, can I ask if you would do the 101 of the parameters of the SCEMS, in particular the focus on allocation of assets and response time, as opposed to duplicity in staffing?
For us, when we first started looking at South County, what we call South County EMS, there was, it started through a grant, looking at the service, started through a grant, but really it was, in particular, it was our EMS director, who happened to be our fire chief, and the EMS director in Deerfield. Basically, they came and they said that we're not meeting our calls like we need to. We have to come up with a different way of doing it. So in effect, the whole thing with our South County EMS started within. That's unusual. Because what we see is, we see a lot of parochialism, especially fire departments, police departments are very parochial. Our neighbor to the west, they have 2 fire departments for 1 town. But that's not unusual, because, I mean, it happens all over the place. So when we started with the South County EMS, we actually started off, I think, with 6 communities that we sent out information to. 1 dropped out real early because they thought they were too far away. Another one dropped out, was very interested on half of the political, half of the service, wanted to, but they couldn't get uniformity in either one side or the other, so basically they dropped out for now. But then we went to look at the service that we were providing. We found that we were averaging in excess of, when a call was answered, it was answered in 20+ minutes easily. And one of our towns, one of the things that really turned the tide in their thinking was was on a Super Bowl Sunday, matter of fact, where they had a call for an ambulance because of a cardiac concern that members of the Board of Selectmen were at, and it took 50 minutes to get an ambulance. And that kind of hit home because they were there. Luckily, it was at the home of a cardiologist. So, I mean, everything worked out okay. So actually, what you're asking right now is an unusual thing because of where it's coming, that you see this and you want to go forward. Apparatus is an easy thing to hit because you look at the expense. You know, when Bobby first came to us 18 years ago looking for a new fire truck, it was $240,000. The last one he bought was what, almost 400, and I think he has in his back pocket another one that's probably going to cost us $500,000 if he gets that last bells and whistles, which is very difficult. So our thing with the EMS is that once you work through the hurdles, and people see that may be beneficial, it can work, but you have to get over the hurdles. And I will say the most impressive thing to me in our whole South County EMS is that we went to the towns at town meeting votes. The EMS director in Whately, Gary, was not a big proponent of the EMS at the time. He wanted to keep working and he wanted to keep the service local. When the town spoke, the way it spoke, and overwhelmingly, he is now he is one of our biggest supporters. He's on our Board of Oversight. He is very active in the Board of Oversight, and the biggest thing is that they didn't want to originally offer their ambulance. They wanted to keep their ambulance in town. They actually, I think at the first meeting after the meeting, they offered their ambulance to be used by the service. So that's, I mean, it can work, but it has to start from the people within. You know, you have to have your deputy chief is here tonight, your committees, because those are people we're going to depend on. And actually, they need to be telling us what they want to do. You know, do you want to have a full-time firefighter that we share? Do you want to share a chief? Do you want share equipment? Do you want to pre-deploy, tankers? Do you just want response things? If we wait for the COG, it's going to take a long time. So we're much better to do it ourselves. Somehow the COG usually asks for money to do everything, but
That's their business, isn't it?
I don't know if you guys noticed that or not. But we actually have talked about this in Tess, we talk about this in our Franklin County Selectmen Association meeting sometime. We talk about this, and we always get stuck on fire. We always get stuck.
Fire and assessors.
And assessors, yeah.
Barbara and Dean and we're the novice citizen reps, and so we got a whole education. And the complexity of it, and something that it seems very logical, like, I mentioned sharing of equipment, but it's not so easy. Because a fire, where is it going to be, and then the geography here of, there's Mount Toby between you and us, and, that all gets difficult, and then with, sharing equipment, you have to make sure that you've got shared training, so that as somebody who gets it, and how do you transport it, if it's there, where is it gonna be it gets, kind of begins to boggle your mind, and so you just gotta work through the hurdles.
It can, and that's the thing. If you have, and while Mount Toby is in between us, what we found very early when you looked at the South County EMS is that Margaret lives in Deerfield, and actually where she lives is probably going to take longer. The ambulance will be stationed in Deerfield, but the ambulance will probably take longer to get to her house than my house, and I live in Sunderland. What we did is it was really kind of, it's actually kind of simple. When you can look at your population centers, you figure out where your geographic center is of your populations. When you have a fire now in Leverett or in Sunderland or Deerfield, before that first call is made, for that first tone goes out, you're pretty much going to get help. Your Amherst is going to be responding. Deerfield will respond, Whiteley will respond. It's almost immediate mutual aid. So your guys are there, and your guys are just going out and doing the first knockdown. But for actually fighting a fire, you're getting help from these other communities. We know we can't. Bobby had a fire the other day in the center of town. When I went by, there was four trucks there, right? They were Deerfield.
South Deerfield, yes.
Yeah, and we had 4 trucks there. We own 3. One of them that doesn't go, but we have 3 trucks. We had 4 trucks there, so we depend on it.
If I could, comments from the Board of Selectmen, there's a political component to all of this as
Sure.
well.
Yeah.
And of course, as Margaret can attest to, the administrators, are heaped upon during the sweetness and light phase, like budgeting, allocations, et cetera, IMAs, all that stuff. So what's your take on the goals here?
Well, I think, we've had a real problem with recruiting and maintaining staff. And I think one thing that we have been doing is we've been in agreement with Amherst for ambulance service. And I've been to the Chancellor's office complaining about the use of tying up all the ambulances every weekend. We're sort of paying for the service. We pay Amherst $25,000 a year right now, and then they collect whatever they get off the insurances. But if it doesn't do you any good on weekends if there's no ambulances available. I think they were actually bringing in Northampton ambulances and other places to fill the. So that's an issue with us. We do work well with Shutesbury and all the other towns. Whenever we had a fight, we had a woman that was in a cave, got stuck in a cave up in Rattlesnake Gutter a couple of years ago. I think we had people from just about every town in the whole area out there trying to, work that out.
That was a cool rescue, though. Everybody piles in on those.
Yeah, well, it's only in Leverett, But I think that was it. And we've had a strong chief for years, run the department really well. But to run into a situation where, the whole staff, really the senior staff, is a retirement age within a year. And there's quite a space there between, between age and experience and to have, I don't know if there's a real heir apparent to any of the 3 positions. I mean, that's something that we have been asking for from the chief, that we would like to start laying that out and see what his feelings are, see who the staff is, so let's see if there's people who could fill some of these positions. The committee did bring forward an idea of having a full-time person, or almost full-time person for day response, to be able to drive a truck. So at least there'd be somebody in town that could drive the vehicle to the fire. That's something that we were going through, trying to figure out how that would work, how many hours we were looking at, if there's someone on the staff that we could use for that position. We have at least one person now that's been going to fire academy, to train. He's been very proactive about that. You know, someone that would like to maybe bring along, you know, so that we could maybe have him step in as we need to. But that's still up in the air, and I guess what my main feelings was, let's try to at least maybe get some conversation going, talk about what we have that we could work on, and see if it's something that we could agree to eventually, and kind of get an idea on the funding. And we just bought a new fire truck a year or so ago, so I mean, I think our vehicles are in pretty good shape. We have a couple of fire stations, one in North Leverett, and then one in the main one in our municipal complex, right down next to the school. So I guess it was more of a, let's see what we can do, and I think it could benefit both of us, both of our departments, if we structured it properly, and whether or not we ever would go, or whether you'd want us to go eventually to the ambulance service as a result of this whole thing, that's up for discussion as well. But we're basically on a yearly thing with Amherst, and so, I mean, we've been pretty much happy, except that it does take quite a bit of time to go from
Out to North.
up to North Leverett.
Right,
You know, it's farther, and I don't know, there was a response time wasn't so great on some of those calls.
It's a long trip.
So, yeah, I think it's more of a coordination thing, and if we could maybe share it, Chief, it was something we'd like to look at. The idea of, maybe, we could partially fund, I don't know what your staffing is for full-time, officers. Are they both fire and paramedics too? So that they would be?
Our current is a fireman EMT, but with the South County Ambulance Service, that's gonna go down to a 12-hour position. So if we shared a fireman / EMT, that would be a good thing, somebody to do inspections, and
Sure,
somebody to be available during the days.
One of the things that we found in our discussions on response times is that, and one of the big selling points was that if you think about, if you are a volunteer, EMT or firefighter, you're toned out. What happens? If it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you have to get up, get dressed. Before you walk out of the door, there's the front door, there's another door that you have to walk into. Then you walk out. If it's the wintertime, you gotta get your car started, then you drive. So you could have a 3 to 5 minute just to get out of the house and get going. And one of the selling points is when we talked about the EMTs, paramedics, was that you're in the station. You're gaining, if someone responds on the first tone, you're gaining at least 5 minutes. Never mind getting to the station, opening it up, opening the doors, getting the truck started or the ambulance. So you could very easily save amount of time. Now, if you have someone full-time, if you think, I mean, and that's our biggest advantage. If we have a firefighter that's full-time, we're getting people on scene, or at least the equipment on scene, a lot quicker.
So does the rest of the call force all go to the fire then, or do they go to the station and get dressed and then go?
What was your question?
So you have a full-time officer who's maybe driving the main truck to the fire. The rest of your force is part-time, volunteer?
Yes.
So do they have their call-out gear at the station?
All the gear is at the station after we moved down to the new station. We keep all the gear there. The idea was so instead of everybody running to the scene, I want them to run to the station, get vehicles and bring those to the scene. Because the vehicle's got the equipment on it, the water and.
Right. Yeah.
Our full-time guy during the days does a lot of, inspections, and if there's a call into the station for somebody's burning brush or, he can dodge all those questions and, be the go-to person during the week.
So dispatch-wise, do you go through Shelburne Control? Yeah.
So how do you see that changing? You said that your full-time guy is gonna drop down to half-time more or less. what's gonna change there? If we were, I guess let me say what we're talking about, if we could share a full-time position, then there'd still be one full-time person, we'd figure out the logistics, but if you don't have a full-time, what do you see changing then?
Well, our ambulance calls are gonna be answered from South County, and what's left is, you know, we're gonna try to do an inspection
Revolving
fee.
fund? Similar to Leverett's, you have a fire inspector revolving fund? So we're establishing
Start
that.
that up, but we still got the 12 hours for doing clerical work and things like that.
So that takes clerical work off the chief's shoulders,
Right.
basically.
How about the whole EMS? We've had Jim Field as our EMS coordinator, and we have, you know,
Emergency management,
emergency
Yeah.
manager, yeah.
yeah, that's, I do that.
Because we have people from the school, from the fire, police, the Selectboard, Board of Health, and we meet maybe once every other month or so, just to, we've set up our gymnasium at our school with a backup generator, so we can use it as a shelter. We've got backup power for the fuel pumps in the municipal garage. So, we've been working towards that way to make sure we have all the trucks to be able to run to the sites. We have a shelter that we can shelter people if we need to.
Yeah, and we also got an emergency planning team. It's mostly all the department heads, one of the selectmen or whoever's available. And we meet as needed also. That's kind of a spin-off of civil defense.
Mm-hmm.
Just wanted to ask the chief, so are you feeling that there is going to be a need to replace that full-time equivalent person, or is 12 hours going to be adequate? I mean, in other words, do you feel like you even want to, or need to increase to, whether it be shared or however that works, to get more hours? I mean, do you think it's gonna impact response times or anything like that?
Well, as far as fires go, yeah. But it's gonna be a wait and see how it works after the first year, to see if the 12 hours is sufficient.
When is that supposed to take effect?
It's gonna be May 1st.
Right around the corner.
Oh, it's right there.
But that's a starting point in terms of our discussion, sharing at least that position.
I think that would be a good first step.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to make a lot of sense. What do you think, Stuart? Being the,
I think it'll be fine. I just want to add that it's not necessarily getting apparatus on the scene. It's doing the triage as to what needs to be sent to the scene.
Right.
And having one person that can respond, even in a smaller vehicle, making some decisions, speeds up the whole process. And
Call
as
them
you,
an extra help.
as you said, whether it's mutual aid coming, that's the real key to this whole thing. Because we might not have anyone else in town to respond, so mutual aid is going to be paramount, and whoever those people are that are coming need to be notified as soon as possible to make a save that's gonna count.
I agree.
Can I just ask a quick question? What is the Leverett Fire Department's current staffing? You have a part-time chief. Are there any other part-time
Stuart.
officers, or is it all call besides the part-time chief?
All call, but the part-time chief.
We used to have highway employees, both Tom and Ben, Eddie, at times were on the highway department, and they always would carry the pager, and whenever there was a call, they would go. But they've both gone to work outside, over to Wagner Wood or wherever, so we don't have that capability anymore.
We have our town administrator.
Who drives truck?
If we need a
Tell you what.
summon in the sewer, fire,
If
it
need
goes
be.
wherever
Really?
she needs it.
What?
Different hats.
We're giving her a pager May 1st, she doesn't know.
She's been taking the fire truck home practicing.
Kind of back into the driveway.
No, I haven't.
You should be in our contract negotiations with the town administrator.
Tough, huh? Really tough.
Okay.
If she can parallel park the fire truck, it's hard to argue with.
We actually had a couple of hires for the highway department over the last year, and we're going through all the applications, and this one guy actually had a lot of fire experience.
Yeah.
And, you know, in hindsight, it might have been something we might want to add to the required job description, just to be able to be familiar to drive the truck. I mean, I think half the time it's, you know, having someone that can physically drive the vehicles.
But you gotta try to look for, I think, basically what you're also saying, even by your study, was you're saying, yeah, I mean, there's short-term things that we can plug in to make it go short-term, but really, you wanna try to put something that's sustainable in
Right.
place. And for us, I think that, you know, we're the same way. I mean, Bobby, we've talked a lot with the chief, and he you know, the thing is, you have to be able to self-evaluate, and you gotta learn what your strengths and weaknesses are. And the chief isn't, you know, it's hard to do. That's probably one of the hardest things to do. But if you take an honest look at what your capabilities are, it makes taking the next step easier. And I think that's one of the things that Bob has done. And you're right about getting someone on the scene as an IC, and all of a sudden he can make that call. Absolutely, you know. I mean, for us, we have some of our areas have hydrants, we have water, some of them we don't. We're not as hilly as you got some big hills, so I mean, you have, the tanker truck that you would buy is a lot different than probably the tanker truck that we would buy, so. I mean, you'd probably need an all-wheel drive, and you'd probably want 3,000 gallons instead of 2,000 gallons, and it's just different.
How big is the Sunderland force right now in terms of active? Because we've learned that there can be people that are on the roster, but for one reason or another, really don't participate that much. So,
Probably 12 to 15 really active.
has that number held, or are you
No,
having
there's
trouble with?
probably a lot more on the roster that aren't.
No, but I mean, the 12 to 15 active, has that been kind of for the past few years, or what are you all finding in terms of recruiting as somebody either
Right
ages
now,
out
we've
or?
got a bunch of young people that are on the force that seem pretty good. I think I have 7 this year that are going through the firefighter 1 and 2 course. So,
Do you have people?
right now, I'm feeling pretty good about that, but, you know, it takes a few years to get them
Yeah,
up
right.
and able to do everything you want them to do.
What's your situation, is this comparable to ours, that you have a kind of the cohort of leadership, the experienced people, are they approaching
Yes.
being older?
Isn't everybody?
Been
Mature.
around a while.
Seniors?
Older, but still willing to serve.
I mean, in the next 10 years, 5 years?
Within the next 10 years, we're gonna start
Within
replacing
10
them.
Within 10 years,
Mm.
so
Us.
you're in better shape.
Us.
But it's tough. You know, where would you like to go next? I mean,
Just headed there.
right,
I
Scott?
was just headed there. What do you think the next steps are? What I'm hearing originally, or I'm hearing really thoroughly through the discussion, is that the potential for a shared full-time skill set.
Yep.
Inspections, you know, equipment checks, those kinds of things. Sounds like it's easy. Seems like it's low-hanging fruit. Whether it's a more detailed analysis of hours, each location's distances. I'll say, personally speaking, one of the most interesting parts of the SCMS study was response times by geography. To me, that's really how you're gonna allocate your assets. You know, where can they be, where are they currently, what are those response times? That made it a whole lot easier to get through some of the more practical decisions. Citing of the service, staffing of the service. And it sounds like I see some of the graphs here about response times, frankly, aren't that bad. However, we see as an aging population of members, and then some retirements pending in really key positions.
And then our general population itself is aging.
Yeah, it's all
So that pool of people that we'd want to capture as, you know, early, you know, startup candidates for the, you know, training, and, you know, a lot of the kids or people that would be in that case, I mean, right next to university, might be grad students, maybe coming through for a few years.
We've actually seen some of that, in particular with the
Well,
EMTs.
your population must be similar, I mean, even more so with all the apartments and things you have. And it's great to have, people that are willing and able to do that, but, you're investing quite a bit of time and effort in a training program and money
Money as
and,
well.
and equipment and whatever you need, and then to have them spend a few years. I'm not sure what we have for turnover on average at this point on our part-time staff, but, in 5 years, some,
Probably one every 2 years, maybe 1 or 2 every 2 years.
Stuart had said
Comes
it's
and
kind of,
goes.
yeah, lose one, get one.
yeah.
Yeah.
And as somebody, recently, and correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes it would be like a couple of years and then they'd, leave. And so the length of time served, but hopefully some of the people now will stick around a little bit longer.
Out of our 12 members now, we have 2 that are in the military. One just brought in his gear, put it down, and can't respond until probably October, if
Sure.
then. And we have another one pending.
Mm.
So that leaves you 10 active roster
And
personnel.
We have another one that has a family leave,
Mm.
and she's had problems at home, so with her daughter, so
Wow.
she's out now.
Mm.
So we go from, 13 just recently down to about 10.
So the second part of I've heard some consensus around need would be shared chief, right? You have a
Yep.
retirement
Yep.
as well. It sounds like that could be a second tier of things to explore.
And if you put those two things together, Scott, there's also a kind of planning for what's the job description. because
Exactly, yeah.
You're gonna get to that, because like the inspections,
Mhm.
your guy who has been full-time almost, has been doing that, and I believe that our chief has been doing that mostly, so we would have to define
Yep.
differently
Yep.
what is the duty of the chief versus the duty of the full-time person.
Great points, inside even the intermunicipal agreements, that commonality's gotta be called
Yeah.
out first.
Right.
Take care of those things.
Stuart has been helpful, at least in my mind, of differentiating kind of the, sometimes it's within one person, but the administrative chief and the operations chief.
Right.
Right.
And whether or not that's in one person, or if you separate it out so the chief becomes more administrative and a full-time, and if we shared, we each still have part-time. So what is the need then to supplement full-time in terms of getting that full-time coverage? And so, in my mind, somehow we can't talk about one without the other.
Good point.
That it's gotta mesh there somehow. And Margaret, correct me if I'm wrong, but when we met ages ago.
The chief was there.
Yeah, right. Didn't we even start mentioning having at that point, maybe our budgets were better, but we had talked about each town having because you had a full-time person, getting a full-time person in Leverett, but then having the hours such that it was
Offset
even
it,
yeah.
greater than just, basically almost 24-hour coverage, but at least, maybe not quite, but really extending it so that there would be, there's all kinds of
Interesting.
possibilities.
Chief, from the Sunderland's perspective, what do you think the next appropriate steps for exploring are?
I'd be interested in exploring the shared firefighter
Uh-huh.
position.
Tom, David?
Yeah, it makes sense. They've done this in the Berkshires already, like a while back, so. And when you look at, I'm looking at your numbers, and it's not far off from a lot of other numbers that I've seen, and you look at, an absolute maximum of, the percentage of, if you take 3% for fires, and then you got 3% for brush fires, then you got mutual aid, and even if you throw in the car stuff, you're still only looking at 20% of your calls that are fire-related. You can see there's a lot of, they're still very busy, but the nature of it's changing and everything. But you can't necessarily predict what time those fires are gonna come in either. So that's part of, that's where data like this is gonna be really useful in trying to figure out everything. And they talk about the geography and everything, where are your calls, what time are the calls and everything. It makes a lot of sense to combine all this. We're all, we've all heard this before, we're all going through similar things. Now we're getting to the point that we gotta start doing something about
Yeah.
the reality that's changing.
You know, we have asked, our committee, there's actually, what, another 4 or 5 altogether on the committee? I think there was
Almost as many
additional.
people as the fire department.
Yeah.
Pretty much. No, but, you know, we did ask that they at least stay in some kind of capacity, to help us through this, because I mean, they weren't
It's
here
a
to look
very
at.
well done report, by the way.
You know,
Very well done.
Tom?
one of the things, when you're, and Bobby, our department, I'm sure your department, there's a lot of joint trainings that go on. But I do know, just from some of the organizations I'm in, that if you're training with the same 3 or 4 people, we get into ruts. It's like somebody's driving a truck, someone's pulling the hose, someone's doing this, someone's doing that, and you do get into a rut. So there's a lot, cross training does occur. It may not occur because Bobby always does this, so why am I doing it? But the advantage, you know, when you're talking about joint chief, you know, administration or operational, the one thing is that when you start putting more people together, all of a sudden, I think you start stretching the people's capabilities. You know, there's a more, you have a more, you know, if you put 20 people together, you're gonna have more, you can have more and better training, when you're doing that. And again, you know, when you're setting up your portable ponds and stuff like that, sometimes there's a lot of work that's goes involved with that. And pulling, you know, everybody doesn't wanna pull hose and roll hose. But all of a sudden, when you get more people, you're sharing a lot of those duties, and you're learning. So, you know, maybe there's Chief?
Yeah, one thing I want to caution you about, and I think Bob might agree with me, is that if we start sharing fires on a more formal basis, I think that there are some people on a department that would be very gung-ho for that, having more fire experience and wanting to respond to more fires. But I'm also afraid that you're gonna burn out a number of people because they're working on a limited schedule as it is with family and friends and so on. And now they're responding more to Leverett than they are to Sunderland, and Leverett's responding, or we can't respond someone to Sunderland, and now there's an animosity that, well, you know, you're not sharing the load here.
Absolutely.
And I think we have to be really careful about asking the call people to do a lot more than they already are doing for both towns. You know, this is an incredible service that both of these towns get from people that are basically volunteering a huge amount of their time, even though they're getting paid, you know, to do that. And I just know that you'll lose people, and if we're not careful about how this is set up.
Absolutely.
So it would absolutely require the involvement of the call force. It would require their involvement and their input with every kind of movement in that direction toward cooperation.
I think the shared firefighter that's being paid a salary is the person that we should be looking towards, not the call force. Because I think it's just gonna be a burnout
Yeah,
situation.
because we have mutual aid anyway.
Yeah, can you talk about Shutesbury and the arrangement?
Yeah, we
with that,
have
and are you thinking, you know, it would be something similar with Sunderland, and then that would really leave.
Yes, that would put us in the middle
Tones would be
between.
going off all the time.
We have automatic mutual aid for structure fires, chimney fires, brush fires,
Okay.
car accident with injury and entrapment, and ice rescue and cold water rescue. So, you know, if we're doing that with Sunderland as well, we're in the middle, and, you know, we're really hurting to get people to respond when we do need them. And I just wouldn't wanna, you know, add more to that.
You raise a really great point. You could, through all of the best intentions, end up stretching everybody's resources, while actually the goal was trying to help each other. That's a really good point.
I mean, we do it now as mutual aid.
Yep.
And I think that works well, when we can respond. But I tell you, I feel guilty when I go to the station and it's only me, and I know I can't respond with one person to Sunderland, and you're right down the street. It's happened several times this year. And don't wanna get involved in any more of those on a more formal basis that
Right.
we really need to respond.
Raise a good point. So am I hearing that the focus really should be on the shared part, the initial focus, shared full-time position, talk about inspections, talk about availability, equipment, et cetera?
And to meet the need of
Huh?
having a greater presence during the hours
Exactly.
when both call forces are possibly not available,
Mm-hmm.
and to respond to, mention the demographics.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we can only project, but with the aging population, medical calls, we can only take a guess, are going to increase.
Right.
And so, you know, one person EMT can respond to that, so that it would be the response time for that, plus having the person there, as Stuart said, to coordinate on the scene, you know, a lot faster, so that it would meet, I mean, I think those are some of our biggest needs, and I don't know about.
Yeah, it's the top of your table too. I mean, nearly 50% of the call is medical. And we're very much aligned. Our numbers are very similar.
I think that I agree with what we're saying about the starting point being that shared position, but if you don't tie that up with thinking about the nature of the chief's position,
Right.
it's not gonna solve any problems.
Good point.
At least on the administrative side, you're gonna have to look at that, and I like that distinction about administrative chief, operations chief, as just a way of beginning to think about, what do you need
Mm-hmm.
to make this work?
Mm-hmm.
Just
really-
throwing another person into the mix isn't gonna do it.
Right.
And thinking outside the box, about starting with needs.
Yep.
And then deciding how those needs are gonna be met by
Yeah.
whom, and I think that's where our committee is saying, we've gotta start thinking differently.
Yeah.
And kind of restructuring, looking at the structure of the department, and not just
Right.
kind of plugging in, somebody's leaving, plug it in.
Right.
Right.
And avoiding that parochialism that I think, Tom, you were talking about. And what I'm heartened by is the fact that you all have had this experience with the EMS, that emergency service, medical service, took huge amount of work. I mean, all I did was just read about it, you know, I wasn't, but I could
And
tell
that was
just from
work, huh?
reading about it, that you guys were doing a huge amount of work. And so I kind of feel like
We
you
still are.
probably will be.
Yeah,
for,
2
you know,
meetings a
working
week
it out.
lately, right, Bob?
But that's good experience for, you know, us, you know, getting involved with you on a slightly different track. But you haven't gone through an awful lot of work figuring out how do you ask and answer the right questions.
It's a really good point, actually, because the integrating of any kind of organization, that's what it is. In this
Yeah.
case here, it's the integration of 3 existing organizations under a completely new umbrella
Right,
is very challenging.
yeah, but
So-
you guys have that experience.
Right. Right. So am I hearing that we have some common goals, clearly, some common needs? There are common goals. So where can and how can Sunderland, would it be helpful if we put together a couple of people to represent what would be the shared interest? And then stick those, really the people who are going to work on the design, if you will, and what the deliverables should be, to come back to each of the respective boards, and of course, then it turns into town meetings, IMAs, et cetera. That's a whole,
Right.
that's a much bigger picture.
Yep.
Tom?
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think you gotta sit down, and you're right, you gotta hammer out, and I wouldn't, and again, I think you have to hammer out what you want and what's gonna work for each community. But personally, sometimes when we talk about shared chiefs or shared positions, some people take,
Right.
they're giving up control.
Right.
Potentially. We don't look at, I mean, our board hasn't looked, even with the EMS, we haven't looked at that, because we figure our goal is to provide a better service to our residents than they had yesterday.
Yep.
And trying to do it, and trying to do that responsibly, and responsible for us means money. And I think that you guys are the same way, I mean,
Yep.
you know, we don't have an unlimited bucket of money, so you try, and if you think about it, if you look at how many runs that you have for your fire department, someone said to me the other day, says, I live in the town of Sunderland and I don't get no services. I don't have any kids, I don't send kids to school. And I said, well, you have a police department. I don't ever have my house hasn't been robbed, and I'm never in a car
Do
accident.
they
How many
drive on
boards
the
and
roads?
committees?
Okay, and I said, well, we have a fire department. I never had a fire, and I don't burn brush. But, we all know, as a person usually doesn't have 30 fires in their lifetime at their house. It's just one, and when you have that fire, you want someone
Right.
to come. But, and it's hard, when we had the EMS and the firefighter, it was easy to have that shared position.
Right.
But how do you have someone in one town, no more, and I believe it's a very important position to have, but how can you tell your residents you're gonna have a full-time firefighter that makes 2 runs a month or less? It's not important to 98% of the people because they don't have a fire.
Right.
So if we can share that resource, like you said, share that resource, share that administrative cost, share that technology, and it's a more of a win. And you are right about someone volunteers in the Leverett Fire Department because they care about their community, not so much about Sunderland. We get that. But if you're offering him good training, professional leadership, and you don't take up too much of his time, it's a win-win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you may have a better retention on people.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm staying longer.
The
What's you say you're meeting a couple of times a week now on the EMS thing.
Just
I mean,
kicking it up,
I don't wanna, burn your chief out before you even get the ambulance service going. I
I
mean,
don't want you to either.
no. Well, I'm just being considerate about it,
I
I
got a
mean,
full-time job besides.
well, yeah. So,
No, we're ready.
I think we can delegate as you
Yep.
want. We have people that have served on our fire department for years, kind of knows how we work. And people have spent a year of their time going through, investigating as much as they could about this whole thing. So I think, we have to ask to make sure that they're willing to serve for another period of time. But I'd like to start, at least defining what we want, what's the common goals of the two towns. We can kind of get an idea in the budget. I think that's a good idea. A time frame as to when this could work. As I say, we do have 2 other of our chief fire folk that are gonna be, that are close to retirement age. And,
Actually, I think Bobby, I think if Bobby and the committees, if they could just exchange some thoughts about what we're looking to do, I think that's what we need to do to start the process. Let's exchange those ideas to see if it's something, are you looking for a person to be in Leverett 40 hours a week? Or are you looking for someone that they're gonna be shared, 20 hours in Leverett, 20 hours in Sunderland, or, just to start what your needs are. And like Bobby said, we're gonna go to 12, so all of a sudden you ramp that to 20 hours. It's not as big as trying to do the whole full-time. But if you have them and you could work out where you can have that person going between the two towns, or one day you're in Sunderland, one day in Leverett. And again, from your fire department is up by the town hall or the school.
right next to the school.
By the school. I mean, you're not that far away from Sunderland,
And
Could I ma-
also, I'm just curious, how long does it take to get from your fire station to our fire station, the maintenance?
15 minutes,
It's not gonna-
not an engine, but.
Could I make a suggestion then?
Shoot.
So, we're going in, next week's our annual town meeting. So, we got nothing going on.
You too, huh?
There's his name.
That's why
Yes,
Margaret
there's
can
his
do,
May
that's why
3rd.
Margaret can do
May 3rd.
practice her parallel
There you
parking.
go. Yeah, there you go.
Yours is next week.
In the
Our-
fire apparatus.
Yours is next week.
Our next meeting that's not gonna be town meeting centric is going to be on the 28th. And, could I make a suggestion, to the board that we get, 1 or 2 or 3 names, that we can get, as a working group?
Okay.
And then that working group can contact your working group, and then the communications can start in earnest.
Great.
Great.
That sounds perfect.
That's
So that-
perfect.
that'll
You wanna
actually
work
Judy
through the
is-
administrators then?
Please,
Yeah,
starting
okay.
with the administrators.
Yeah,
would
I
be
was
the-
gonna say,
the best
because
way.
Judy is the chair, but if it goes through, if the administrators are the channel, everybody's gonna be in the loop. Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
Can I just ask, I mean, I'm being very specific here.
Uh-huh.
You said that your person is dropping May 1st to 12 hours.
Yep.
Okay, so that's gonna leave you with a shortage there. Our chief is retiring in January. And so I'm just very cognizant of, I mean, because I think that Leverett has got to think of what are we gonna do, not just the shared person, because we're not gonna get any money. I
Right.
mean, we're talking next fiscal year, so
I
there's
understand.
some serious gaps here.
Yep.
And, what we do in the interim, in terms of particularly the chief, if we're not particularly talking about a shared chief, that's maybe something that in Leverett we have to talk about. So it's, you know, the whole timeline.
sure, I
think
think,
that-
Thinking
Scott,
about-
if I
yeah,
could,
go ahead, Tom.
I mean, we need to
maybe,
begin,
maybe if you
but-
could, maybe their committee and their board needs to write what their goals are.
Yeah.
Write what your goals are,
And the
and
timeline.
just to let you know, from our board and our chief, we're willing to discuss anything you put on the table.
Oh, good.
We're not, you know, we're not adverse to talking shared chief, we're not adverse to talking shared personnel. You know, we will absolutely look at that.
Perfect.
And so I mean, you gotta start someplace, and you're right, your goals may be much more immediate than ours, so maybe why don't you have something that you can send to us, and then we can start talking about it real quick.
Yeah, there's an inherent tension associated with goals and then timelines.
Always is.
Sometimes there
Funding.
just always is.
And funding,
Well-
never
funding.
mind funding.
Well, that may be another piece. But again, this may well shape up to be a staged series of steps that in a number of years you look back and go, wow, that really worked out, you know, splashingly well.
Yeah, and so we may need to look at some
Especially-
interim thing,
Yeah.
because as Tom pointed out, sustainability, I mean, and looking at the long range is more important than just kind of patching things together.
Couldn't agree
because
more.
then that mode of operation just continues
Right.
Right, we don't
year,
solve the
year
land.
after year, and it's, well, we made it through this year, kind of thing. But we're looking at firefighting departments in the next couple of decades, which are probably gonna look nothing like
Right.
we have today.
You know, it's funny that you should talk about that, because you asked earlier about our EMS and some of the driving thing. One of the things that was driving EMS, one of the communities wanted very badly to make it succeed, so they tried for 6-7 months, they tried a whole litany of incentives to try to recruit more people and to make it work. And at times, it did work, but it was short-term. And I think when you talked about, our discussions always came back to sustainability. And were you just, not this may sound familiar to anybody in the audience, but was one person making all the runs? You know, you need 2 people, well, was 50% of that team always making 95% of the runs? And is that really a sustainable operation?
Right.
So, but that's what we're willing to discuss.
That all sounds really good, and I think, Scott, you were talking about getting the discussion started. To me, that's a number one thing. As soon as this small group of people can begin talking and lay this thing out and thrash it out,
Yep.
the quicker we're gonna get to some vision of, are there short-term steps that we have to take because we're in a different position? But if we have to, then they ought to dovetail with the longer-term thinking that this
Agree more.
group is gonna be looking at.
Yeah, it's what do we do well?
Yeah,
What don't we do well?
yeah,
Where do we improve?
right. Which
Pretty
is
simple,
right,
3 simple questions.
Right.
And I think we're gonna find that if we don't do this ourselves, it's gonna be forced on us,
Yep.
because the writing is on the wall that we need to change, and we can't survive going forward as individual towns in
Right.
this respect. And
Right.
this, and we talked about the parochialism, and this is one of the things that the nature of what it means to be a town is changing, and it's very difficult for some people to grapple with that and deal with that. And we just have to figure out a way to do it, you know, and you can't do everything yourself anymore, as we've come to see.
We had actually had the opportunity several years back where we had Shrewsbury and Leverett both lost our police chief at the same time. You know, so
Yep.
both offices were vacant. And we actually had conversations and went through a series of votes, the idea of having a joint police chief and a shared, maybe, a sergeant in each town or whatever, and it was voted down in both towns.
Really?
Yeah, it was I think it was really unfortunate.
Yeah, we
I-
had
I
people
think,
come
yeah.
from Maine that had done it, and they had started with the shared police chief, and then they moved to a shared fire chief a few years later. And they had great success with it.
I think all of these services,
But-
we need to look at, at some point about combining stuff, because it's
Mm.
just, on the one side, people don't wanna share, but on the other side, they don't wanna pay for the services.
Right, exactly.
And you can't have it both ways, but yeah.
I would,
That's
I
called
would say
denial.
if you're looking at shared position like that, you look at, if you put the right person in that position, I mean,
Right, well, that's the key thing, and that was, I think, part of the reason that it didn't pass in either town, is we didn't have the person. So the thought
was a
of going
concept.
out and finding someone for this whole new configuration was a
You
little
kinda
daunting
need a
to
salesperson. I
people.
mean,
But
it's-
if we had had the person in place, which is the way these shared things happened in the communities that I discovered, they had someone and they asked them to take on another community because they had someone they saw would be competent to do it. That worked better than going out and hoping to find the
Julie
right
actually
person.
was the chair of our first fire department study committee.
Nice.
we
So,
find,
come full circle.
you find, it's interesting, cause when you look at the South County EMS, you bite, you eat, every one of us bite our tongues at some point.
Well, sure.
But it's good because for us, our biggest thing was with Deerfield, because Deerfield has 51% of our, the invoice, they get invoiced, Deerfield gets invoiced 51%. And then Sunderland and Whately break up that other 49%. And it was hard, and the Board of Selectmen in Deerfield, I think, showed great leadership when they said, look, if this can work, we have to be equal partners. And I don't know if they understand how much that did to making the whole thing work. So that was great leadership. I mean, there was concessions made. We had a non-voting fiscal agent that comes from the town of Deerfield. But so there's concessions made, but that part, I thought that was great leadership on their part, that they went, their town says, no, look, for this to work, this is what we're gonna have to do. So it can work, but we all have to work together and understand, as Scott says many times, the greater good, is that's what we're striving for.
It was said very early on in those discussions that, that organization can't be predicated on the bones of winners and losers.
Right.
You're just providing a service that you don't have. That's all it is.
Right.
So on the 28th.
Can I just add one thing though?
Sure.
Money. And as we pointed
We'll
out
take
in the
any you
report.
have.
We haven't talked about this, is that cost versus risk.
Sure.
And not just the parochialism, but I think both towns, or any towns, or our entire state, Franklin County, is gonna have to deal with this. So to really start looking at what fire service costs now, and that we can't, we've had wonderful service from volunteers, but you compare that to other town departments, and so I think
Sound like a,
we've got to somehow convince the towns that
oh yeah.
In fact,
they need to pay.
in fact, it's a very good point. In fact, that was one of the things that came out. We had a study an EMS study, and the first thing that was said, and the first thing that was said in all of our joint meetings, was that if you're looking for this to be cheaper, it will not happen. Because there's nothing beats the model that we ran before. Basically, you had volunteers. They're called volunteers. We understand the difference between volunteers and call. We all understand that. But for the most part, for the very small stipends you get, they're volunteers. We cannot replicate that service for less money. And that, you're right, absolutely right. That has to be known. And we are quite honest with our residents. We feel, right from the beginning, all three towns, that we're telling you right now, we're not doing this because it's gonna provide a cheaper, more economical way to do it. We're gonna give you a service that we need. And it may cost a little bit more. We fight now, our meetings now are about budgets and how to keep all that in line. But you're absolutely right, and we do have to educate our population, and we did.
Perfect.
You're
I
absolutely
think
right.
that's an important starting point.
Absolutely.
There's agreement.
You sound like one of our finance committee members who says, we need to calculate the cost of all those volunteers' hours and put that in front of the townspeople, and I love him for saying it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It was like, oh, that's a good point,
Yeah.
Francis, that's a great point. How on earth do we begin that process? Well, we start in the hundreds of hours and we'll go up from there, even inside of this building.
Well, you asked that person that asked Tom what he's getting for his tax dollar, maybe he could start that study.
There you go,
There
good
you
point.
go.
So what we'll do is,
In education.
I think from our perspective, I'll speak for myself, but hopefully paraphrase what I'm hearing from the board. With all that's on the current members' plates on the EMS, that a broadening of that team is gonna be really important to work with Leverett toward a really good conclusion. We wanna have a good goal here and a good conclusion to that goal. So clearly the chief, maybe somebody else from fire service, try to expand it to 3 people or more if they're interested. But also in that first set of meetings, first set of exchanges, be in that week of the 28th, 29th, 30th. We get those names out and close that loop and start the process.
Can we ask Leverett to provide information on what they're looking to do right now?
Yeah, actually, it's a great point.
I think you probably already have it.
I think they said.
It's largely in this,
Yeah.
but.
The next steps,
Yeah.
Yeah.
ideas, all that.
You're talking May 28th, right?
I'm talking about April 28th.
Wow.
Their town meeting is May 3rd.
Oh, I understand. I was just talking about getting names to you, that's all.
Yeah.
Oh, we can do that,
Just
sure.
names. To Tom's point, though, and I think rightly so, if there's some immediate goals, really immediate objectives that come out, maybe the timeline is something to share quick sooner rather than later, and 1 or 2 of the short-term attainable goals.
Okay.
And then we can avoid initially the trap of going,
All right.
Trying to get too big too
Right.
fast.
It'll
Yeah.
keep us on track. It'll set our agendas for the
exactly right.
groups.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, so you'll hear from us the week of the 28th.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate you having us over.
Thanks for coming.
Great work there, committee, nicely done.
You might see me on Thursday, hopefully.
Okay,
Thanks very much.
enjoy your night.
Thanks, thanks so much.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, Scotty, let's go.
Come on, Mr. Moderator, jump right up here at this table.
You're the only one left, so,
Last man standing.
I don't know, are you with,
And
you
Richie's
doing
got your
FCAT
back,
stuff,
just
or,
in case.
or are you an audience member?
Want to
today?
go through the
All right,
annual
good.
town meeting
We need
warrant.
somebody else besides Bob.
Annual town meeting warrant with recommendations. There are a handful of these articles that we know we cannot act on tonight. We're meeting again, we're actually meeting next Tuesday also, in particular on the budget.
What's that?
We're also meeting again next Tuesday.
All right, shoot.
Yep.
We have, Bob, that's the 22nd.
Second?
Bob, I have extra copies for you. There you go.
Are these numbered the way we're gonna talking to them?
They should be warrant draft motions. You're welcome.
Okay, so we've already done recommendations on, we got up to the 83,000 under Article 7 is something we can't really get into until next Tuesday, in that there's a school committee meeting tomorrow. And the school committees, looks like they have their budget on the agenda again. That's the elementary school committee. So Article 7 is something that we'll revisit next Tuesday. And then we have in front of us CPA, CPC recommendations. So Article 9 is one we can talk to. Article 10.
Okay, let's go.
Okay. And so Article 9 is amending the town code of Sunderland. Wait a minute.
I'm sorry, Article 9?
Yeah.
Okay, so Article 9 is actually amending the vote taken in October for the EMS funding.
Got it.
It's restructuring the funding.
Yep.
And the purpose of this is to actually free up the ambulance reserve that was committed
77,000.
and fund FY14 local EMS for the time that the regional EMS wasn't up and running.
Correct. We didn't have a recommendation on this last week.
Because legal counsel was reviewing it.
Right.
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion made and seconded. This is a recommendation. And again, Bob, this is gonna rescind a prior article and then appropriate money for the FY15 year from that article. Any more discussion? If not, all those in favor of recommendation?
Aye.
Aye?
Appropriated, not 15, 14.
For,
Finish off this year.
Right, FY14.
yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right, 14, I'm sorry, I misspoke. You're absolutely right. It's
Okay.
finishing the current year, not the next
Right.
year.
Okay.
Right. And it clearly says that in the article, it's FY14.
Good snag.
Aye.
That's the important place to state it
I
on
couldn't
the
get it
article.
out there. I think.
What? So Article 10
the
is
budget
the budget article, and we're gonna hold off on this until next Tuesday.
Yep.
Article 12 is, again, a move for capital money, monies to capital stabilization. Now, can we put this in a very brief framework? We have limited numbers of resources. Any given year, we have limited numbers of resources in the current year. The current year really is going to place undue, unbalanced burden on available free cash. Over the last couple of years, we've used the free cash guidelines where a third of it is appropriated for the operating budget, a third of it goes to a combination of stabilization or capital stabilization, and the remainder, final third, is allowed to ride into the next year to act as seed money, as it's referred to sometimes, for generating free cash. We have a couple of different approaches to fund a couple of different articles, and I wonder if it would make sense for the board to hold off on this transfer to stabilization. I say, having spent as much time as we have with the budget, that the burden on free cash this year, we may want to consider postponing capital spending as well as this transfer, and make sure that the percentage of free cash moving to the next year is preserved. Because if we knock free cash down to a very dangerous low number, we set ourselves up for future year challenges. So we have a capital discussion coming, although we don't have a lot of resources for it. We have a couple of one-time charges, particularly the teacher's retirement, which is going to be worked on a little bit, we hope, tomorrow, before we can plug the value in. But I look at this and I think my finance committee guy, my selectman for a number of years now, and the ability to generate free cash in the upcoming year, in my mind, is more paramount than moving money into capital stabilization, based on the limited number of resources that we have.
I would agree. Because you don't wanna solve this immediate problem only to create a bigger one
It's a really good way to
next
put
year,
it, yeah.
you know? And it's not the ideal, not moving into stabilization, but it's much, for lack of a better word, it's not the best way to put it, but it's less irresponsible than doing it the other way.
Good point. So that's the framework for what this article is right now. Bob?
Is the current, or does the current budget gap include a number for Article 12?
No,
No.
outside of the budget.
Okay.
Tom, you know, get where we're coming from, what speaking to with respect to the use of free cash? Instead of appropriating it into stabilization, if we have to use that as an available resource?
Yeah, I hope people understand that we have a question that's gonna be on the ballot, asking to fund a capital stabilization
I was
program.
just headed there.
And,
That's the
and
next step.
when you look at this year's capital budget request, when you look at it, the one thing you'll see, and so I understand what you're saying,
Yep.
but sometimes I liked what we did last year and the year before about having the capital budget presented at town meeting.
Yep.
I think it's important because what we're doing is we're showing there's a programmatic method of this, what most people see. If you look at the thing, you know, what we're looking at, a police cruiser replacement.
The
All right.
list is right.
Cruisers need to be replaced. All right, I'm not saying that one has to be replaced this year, okay,
But
that's
eventually
why we
will.
discuss it.
Right.
But cruisers have to be replaced. Highway department radio equipment, highway department generator, town office front steps. We go, you know, air handlers. These are typical, you know, elementary school boiler. Well, guess what? We have the elementary school, we have the town office building, we've got the library, we got the graves. We have buildings, we have the highway garage that have to be maintained.
Yep.
You know, if you got your house, you got a boiler, you know, in your house, it does not last forever, although we may want it to. So these are normal expenses that come about.
No, you're absolutely right with respect to that, and as a teachable moment goes, this is a capital budget request in front of us. We see that it's currently underfunded, I'm echoing the point. But the interesting part about this teachable moment is we have continued to fund this through one-time revenue streams. Or we've rolled it up.
That may or may not be reoccurring.
That's the trap.
Exactly.
And that's the pitch for funding the capital stabilization vote in the upcoming election.
Right, they're ongoing costs that should be funded by ongoing revenue.
Correct.
And again, I would say, you know, 15 years that we've been talking about the importance, and Scott, you've been involved a long time, even on the finance committee, the importance of having a capital plan, because that is an expense that occurs.
Yeah, and we oftentimes look at it either through one-time sources, or we float the idea of debt. And I'm not personally exclusively, debt adverse, but it's not always best policy. So, but you're absolutely right, Tom. With respect to the article in front of us, the question is, with the burdens on free cash, is there a recommendation for Article 12? I don't see us
Not
moving
yet.
money in,
No.
but we have to do this after we hear about
Right,
the upcoming vote.
yeah, so we can pass it right now.
Okay.
Okay, so that's a
13
vote.
is actually
No,
the,
and I would like to just make one point.
Yep.
I think in the last period of time, we've had one Standard and Poor's increase on our bond rating. I believe we've had two.
the second one.
And that's a reflection of a lot of things that we're trying to do, with budgeting.
It's a reflection of fiscal responsibility, yeah.
And it's recognized by outside source, it's recognized not by us telling you that it's happened, by an outside source.
Yeah, and
That's business,
yeah, they're not politically motivated either. They don't really care.
so.
Good points. So the next actually is the capital budget. And again, we hadn't planned on presenting, but again, we can't necessarily vote on that with respect to tonight. Okay, next up, we did 15. Looks like the last of them, right? We've got,
I think, yeah. 'cause
all of
then-
ours are done. Oh, sorry, 20. We have to do the CPAs.
Yeah.
19, 18. So, as we go about the CPA fundings, right, it's important to bear in mind that these are funded through resources generated by the Community Preservation Act. So these have revenue streams associated with them. They have a CPC that accepts projects and then reviews and submittals and then recommends to town meeting. So we have in front of us under Article 18, which is the shared CPA funds request for the Frontier tennis courts.
Mhm.
Now, the superintendent has withdrawn this article.
No.
In Deerfield, she did.
No.
Sorry.
Or the Deerfield, I don't know what happened, but as far as Deerfield, I don't know exactly the scenario, but we received this RCPC's recommendations this afternoon after.
The superintendent asked us, the CPCs, to keep it on and allow them more time to work with the town of Deerfield. There were more questions that Deerfield had that they didn't,
So our
I
CPC's,
believe, that we were not.
Got it. I read in the paper that it was withdrawn, but
They
that's okay.
did, but there's been emails going back and forth.
Okay,
And Richard conveyed to us that the superintendent asked that we vote on it and keep it on the article.
I would recommend keeping it on there because, given what it is and what it's for,
Mhm.
I mean, it's a.
Is that what you heard, Margaret?
While it's located at the school, it's used by.
I didn't hear either way, actually, but I do know that Sunderland CPC voted 6-0 to recommend.
Right.
And Scott, the reason is that, we can vote now. It allows the superintendent the opportunity to talk to the Deerfield CPC and may convince them otherwise. If the other 3 town CPCs vote for it, maybe that's something that will influence the Deerfield CPC and/or the question that they have, they can finally get.
get their answer.
Yep,
Okay.
that's, I would agree 101% on that. Yep.
Easy. Okay, so 18, I appreciate the update.
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion made and seconded to recommend, this is $8,451 from CPA. And this is, again, would be a contribution toward the resurfacing, reconstruction of the tennis courts at Frontier.
And in fact, from the state CP, the Community Preservation Group.
Yep.
This is exact kind of things
This is
that
a
they
textbook
want.
thing, exactly.
Towns working together, utilizing that,
Mm-hmm.
combining their forces to do good projects.
Okay. So we have a motion made and seconded for Article 8, to recommend Article 18. All those in favor?
Aye.
3-0, please.
The next one, the CPC voted 5-1 to recommend. And I apologize, I didn't have these recommendations on here. I received them this afternoon after I printed this, so
Okay, so 5-1, Margaret?
5-1.
And above, 18 was?
18 was 6-0.
Thank you. Okay, so this is $20,000, $20,458. Softball fields at Sunderland Elementary, Merritt's Field. This is on the south, well, it'd be on the, south side, the south field. That's on Swampfield Drive, on Swampfield Drive. Okay, discussion? There's no discussion? Is there a recommendation? A motion to recommend?
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there discussion?
The one voting no was myself.
For CPC.
For the CPC and the CPC, yes. And for me, it was just the fact that CPC is, you're supposed to try to influence the greatest number of people. And I just felt that there's other, I'll follow up with another project I voted yes for that other, so.
Okay.
And it's not that it's not a worthy project, I just thought is, when you look at the CPC.
Just trying to balance it out in terms
Right,
of
correct.
other
In the
projects.
big picture,
Mhm.
that makes sense. So what you've said, what I'm hearing, Tom, is that in that discussion, you've got essentially a league-size softball field being created, recreated, reconstructed.
Yeah, there's gonna be a lot, it's gonna be it's gonna be a softball field versus a baseball field. What does that mean? It means that the infield will be skived.
Yeah.
So there'll be no grass, there
Right.
will be, a PA system, they're gonna have a PA system, they're gonna take that electrical box in the back, they're gonna do something with that. They're gonna put dugouts, they're gonna have real dugouts gonna be installed. There will not be, a baseball field has a pitcher's mound, this will not have a pitcher's mound, it'll be flat. It'll be done professionally, it'll be done very, very well. There's a lot of, volunteer work that'll go into it. It will be a top-notch facility.
Can I ask a question? What's the ongoing maintenance plan for that?
That's part of the proposal that they have.
Okay,
I also know that Deerfield Recreation is contributing $2,500 to it because there is a need for
Or
softball
fields.
fields.
Another alternate field, sure.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. All right, there's been a motion and a second and some discussion. Is there any further discussion about this? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay. Article 20, $95,000, $95,578 from CPA. This is a phase in a project of, and I want to make sure I'm not mischaracterizing that. This is a phase in a project for reconstructing the elementary school playground. This is on the north side of the building. And as I recall, this phase included a fair amount of landscaping, texturing work before we got into equipment replacement.
Right, a lot of structural work that needs to be done at the site.
Okay. And Margaret, what was the community preservation on this?
3-3.
That was 3-3.
Sorry, Tom, I forgot you were there. 3-3. Okay. And again, this is clearly an incremental program.
Yes.
Sort of?
Approach.
Okay. Discussion?
The plan as presented, I will try to convey the thoughts of the CPC. I believe that the CPC voted 3-3 because they were looking for a better defined path forward. Not that the plan doesn't meet the criteria for CPC use, because it does, but they were looking for a better definition. And again, I voted yes, so I'm trying to convey
Right, you're
the
just
no
trying,
side.
right.
They kind of wanted to articulate more what's going on. It's a multi-step project.
Yep.
Right.
What was being presented for the 95,000 was to remove the structures, playground structures that are presently in place,
Okay.
so that that area can be totally renovated.
The grade,
Yes.
the ground.
Right, well, the
Which means
site work.
taking the stones that are there now.
Yep.
Taking all the stones out.
Yep.
The sub-base.
Okay.
Restoring the sub-base, put in proper drainage.
Okay.
Defining the edges to maintain, and then putting material back into that area that would be safe, what present conditions would call safe.
Okay.
There's some people say you got stone there, stone, because they've all been compacted, there
Yep.
was silt and everything. It's not a good structure for children to be playing on. So we're planning on bringing a new surface in, which would probably be a bark mulch type materials. Then they would reset the structures. They may eliminate one
Okay.
structure,
Yeah.
or that are no longer safe structures. Put the structures, the older structures, back into place, and then add one or two, depending on how much money is left over, how much volunteer work can be had. They may have one or two structures that they would put back in.
Okay.
It would not include where the swings are.
Yep.
The swings
Yep.
would be
Separate, yep, that makes sense.
So this is just, basically, it's getting a new surface.
Yep.
For the playground to start from, and basically the same material, maybe rearranging the apparatus a little bit, and maybe adding one or two new apparatus.
Okay.
There is a plan. Fortunately, we have a landscape architect in town that's doing a lot of the, and he's been asked, his company's allowed him to work on the project.
Nice.
So there's a lot of in-kind money being up right now, being put forward. Basically, some of the members of the CPC just want to refine the plans a little bit more. Maybe not this year, and also to spend a little bit more time with the community, get more buzz in the community about what it's trying to do.
So I can see, Tom, under Article 19, and I appreciate the synopsis, the near we've heard from the folks working on the softball field, a sense of urgency and timing. What I'm hearing now under Article 20 is maybe the sense of there's a need and there's a sense of urgency, but the dissenting members on the CPC were looking for a little more in the way of detail or for the next phases.
And you see, because when you look at the total, because, and when I say the total, they were talking about, putting in a walking fitness area, so that was gonna be added. It was gonna be more, potentially much more than just
Sure.
playground for the students.
Okay.
I will say that, the principal, Ben, came and spoke to the CPC about the importance of a playground in the development of children.
That makes sense, actually.
And he made, I think, his presentation, swayed my thoughts, just because of what he said. And sometimes we forget, we forget that time we spent as children on playgrounds. We forget that, but about what it teaches a child, and the importance of playground structures. And he made a very compelling thing. I think CPC probably thought there was more, things that we could do, meaning volunteers.
Yep.
And I think they thought it was a pretty small group working on it, and there was concern that the school committee, and again, I'm not saying I agree or disagree with the assessment,
Yep.
but that the school committee hadn't come out in support of the playground. And I don't necessarily know if that's the school committee's job to come out
Yeah.
from, but that was one concern of
Sure.
some of the members on the.
So
on the
not
group.
quite in their purview, but the support, though, certainly sends a message as well.
I thought they did come out in support of that at one point, actually, at one of their meetings.
I think they said 2 members had supported it. But, and again,
Right.
to me,
you're just-
it was just a point of conversation, it was points of conversation.
I will say that if they, to those people who descended, if they pay attention to the local newspapers, other communities around here have voted the exact same thing in with no plan in place, or very little plan in place. So I'll compare and contrast that with what, and I will say that this has been, the plan's been going on for quite a while. And not unlike the discussion about capital expenses, a playground is like any other thing. It's gonna wear out, and you're gonna have to replace it just like anything else. It's got a finite lifespan. And, you talk about equipment that half a geodesic dome thing or whatever, that does not meet code right now. And one of the problems you run into.
Do you know how long that thing took to put together?
I imagine it took quite a while. I could just see a lot of people sitting out there saying, all right, who's got nut A here and bolt B,
That was Scott Wormy.
Was that? But,
I remember putting that.
Buckminster Fuller is wondering why you only build half.
but like, this is one of those things too, where you can only go so far into the project before you have to replace everything to meet code.
Yeah.
So it's kinda like doing a house renovation. It's like, if you can touch up to here, but as soon as you touch anything beyond that, now you've gotta start meeting code. And so, yeah.
I wish if the FCAT was taping the meeting, sometimes you take votes and you don't feel good afterwards. And I think our chairman struggled on the vote, and I think we postponed the vote until the end, or,
Yeah.
and again, I don't disagree. I think the people, and matter of fact, members that voted, no on the committee volunteered to work with the group that was playground committee to try to make it better. Not better, but to help them with moving it forward. So, but there was things like how it was presented, and when it was presented. It was kind of like presented after the debt. So I don't know, and may have been talked about for a while, but it was presented like after really the CPC.
There's a process issue.
Yeah, the process, it was presented late, and it was presented.
Right.
So, and I understand every one of their concerns, and it doesn't matter. Now philosophically, I guess you would, to me, I look at things like low and mod housing, that we have not even,
Well, that's a whole
we haven't
category we haven't even
addressed.
tapped.
If you look at
exactly.
all of this, you know, we're spending a lot of money on recreation.
Because I've been paying attention to what other communities are doing with their CPC stuff, and I see other communities grapple with the housing, and we all know that we have an issue with, well,
You're right.
according to the state anyway, with affordable housing.
Right, so,
So-
so I just think it's,
Yep.
it's tough, and I understand vote, I do, on this one, I can understand why we have a 3-3 vote. And it wasn't, no one thought it wasn't a good project, it was just how it was right now as being presented. And I could go one step further, when we put in our Veterans Memorial, to argue on the other side, we had a model, we had plans,
Right.
I mean, it was a lot more than what we've, so, I can see both things.
Good points. Well, I would weigh in and say my only reservation about a project like this is really this is a second year of CPA appropriations. And the scale of it essentially equals 100% of the town's contribution.
And we generate approximately $93,000 a year, so you're right.
And again,
But this, I would tell you that this is one step also,
agreed.
you know,
Okay.
so.
Okay, I really appreciate the discussion with respect to kind of Tom as a CPC member and board rep, and David with close ties to the elementary school currently, so I do appreciate that. Is there a motion to recommend on Article 20?
Motion.
We have a motion and a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. 2-1, please. 21, $7,200 for Phase 2 of the Town Clerk's project for preserving historic records.
The CPC's vote was 6-0 on this.
Okay.
Motion.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
3-0, please. This is a
Next one, the
decades-long
Well, it was good.
CPC voted 4-1 with one abstention on this one.
So this is the front steps. 4-1 and 1? Yep.
4-1-1.
The CPC, the CPC was really looking at two proposals.
Yep.
The vote that was taken was on the proposal that was kind of morphed from Margaret's original proposal.
So we have a concrete direct replacement, modifying, exposing the marker. And then the second proposal is bricks and granite and,
Well, what came back was that, the CPC thought if you're gonna, the longer term, more permanent repair, would be to, instead of just putting back the concrete, to put back granite on the stairs and
Okay.
on the edges, just say, instead of just looking at concrete, they'd put a brick tray on the side and build up brick.
okay.
So it would look nicer. I'm the one that voted no. Surprise. But my voting no is because I understand our budget constraints. And I think we can fix the stairs for $20,000 or $25,000 and
Like the original proposal.
what I would say stick with the original proposal and get it done. And I think when you look at the potential that the CPC supported, it would look wonderful. But I think it's outside of,
So it begs the question, is outside of something that was asked for?
Did the
Right.
did the CPC vote any recommendation on the original proposal, or did they not?
no.
Okay.
And I guess technically, you might say too that the concrete, while not as nice looking as, from an aesthetic standpoint, it may not look as nice as the brick and granite. It's probably actually more in keeping with the architectural design of the structure anyway.
Were they concrete steps when you
Yes.
went?
I didn't go here.
The front steps were concrete. We have pictures proving that,
Right.
yes.
When you look at, because it's a typical like 1920s
Did you mix the
municipal
concrete for the
building.
kids?
Right, it would have been like a little bit more of a rough sandy concrete, but that's generally what was used on structures like this.
But again, this is not, I mean, it's in the historic district. This is pretty basic architectural
Right.
that existed during that time. And again, I have nothing, you know, if I had all the money in the world, I think the recommendation from the CPC is fine, except that we don't have all the money in the world, and we need functional, safe front steps.
The other ones have gotten us up to this point from the 1920s, so I think, you know.
Well, they've been fixed before. The front steps were last fixed in 1997, 96, something like that.
Some repairs.
So they have been fixed before.
So let me ask a process, talking about process. We have motions about to come up. We have an article here. We're talking about different values, right? Town meeting is the appropriating body. The warrant article is effectively the article, posted accordingly. The motion reads very similarly. Is this turned into something that's amended down on the town meeting floor with no recommendation from the CPC?
I think,
I'm thinking about the
I'm not-
mechanics of it.
I'm really not schooled enough to give you an answer, Scott.
Yeah.
Margaret would have,
I'd have to look
Margaret
into it.
would have to talk to
I know,
I'm
but
thinking
originally-
about it.
Kotka, and
Yeah.
I know I have, I've been, someone has come up and offered to do a temporary repair to
Yep.
the stairs to
Yep.
get us through for another year.
Yep.
To go back and talk about it.
Right.
So I think Margaret's gonna take advantage of that person's.
Oh, yes. I've already
That might
spoken
be
with.
Right,
the-
so
yeah.
Margaret, so that person has made that offer, and I did convey that to the, chair of the CPC.
Got it. Okay.
We're
I was
calling
thinking
it the
about the
Save-
go
Save the
ahead.
First Step project.
Right.
That's what we're calling this one.
I
Temporary.
was thinking about it in relation to the two sets of actions
You know,
today.
Scott, I really, you know, there's a whole, the CPC is an whole animal by itself.
Yep.
Richard Lopatka and, Jennifer probably know the most in town about how monies can be used from
Yep.
CPC,
Yep.
so you would have to ask them,
Yep.
and I feel confident whatever their response
Yeah,
was.
and again, I'm not trying to avoid conflict. At the same time, I want to ensure that we respect, as we said earlier, the process.
Yep.
I would say that'd be nice to ask them, and because if we could amend it down, I still think that if we had a lesser amount, I would amend it down to a lesser amount and get it done correctly.
I'll talk with the chair. I'll talk with Richard to see if CPC would be willing to, to vote on a recommendation for the original project proposal.
Got it. Okay.
At least you'd have that.
I also think, I mean, their proposal's not a bad proposal. It's probably long-term a better fix, but, you know, that's a lot of money.
Right.
Okay.
So the basic
I'll
question.
check
Do we
on
do
that.
it again next year?
Right.
Okay, got it.
Right.
Okay. Is there a recommendation, a motion to recommend on
Motion.
Article 22?
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. All those in favor?
No.
Wait a minute. Give us an aye?
Yeah.
Okay, we had an in favor. All those opposed?
No.
Nay. 1 to 2, please.
You could,
I
you,
was like,
hey,
I had one, it
hey,
was like,
It's okay.
it was like angel
Scott,
and devil. Which one was it?
You're not moderator material, Scott.
I didn't ask for roll call.
Moderator has to be hearing out of both ears.
That's
Bob
right.
doesn't hear out of any, so he's.
I heard out of both ears at the same time.
Yeah. It's like, wait a minute, what's going on?
Okay. Very good. So next up is Article 23. This is $10,000, Phase 1 concept and feasibility study for pedestrian and bicycle pathway systems.
The CPC voted 6-0 on this.
This is, there's a group, it's not a committee.
Working group.
The working group, probably 12, 13 plus people are working on it. And this is trying to, it's kind of an offshoot from back in the economic development. We were talking
a good
about
point.
utilizing Sunderland's natural resources and stuff. I think this $10,000, they have some great ideas. It's just trying to put everything together in a plan to bring forward, so. It's putting walking trails and bike trails and stuff like that together, so.
Yeah, that group presented to us, and I
Yes,
thought
they
there
did.
was an awful lot of really positive energy, and then getting it in a cohesive format.
Yeah.
Really can move forward for maybe multiple years, multiple phases, but at least you can have that plan laid down.
Exactly.
And this could tie in well with the master plan chapter updates, especially on the circulation, so when you're talking about village center, so that's,
Great point. Okay, is there a motion?
Motion.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. All those in favor of recommending Article 23?
Aye.
Aye, 3-0, please. Okay, and now, for the Article 24, every year with the CPA monies, we appropriate based on those percentages, and that helps build the fund up. So these are anticipated revenues, and those anticipated revenues, this is the allocation thereof. And again, this is a mechanism of the Community Preservation Act. Mechanism of the Community Preservation Act, and effectively what it does is it creates the percentages of funds anticipated from the town for the upcoming year. And then there's the state match accordingly.
I would ask the board to hold on this because
You're still working on numbers.
they're still working on numbers.
Okay.
It's easy.
So, we'll work on that on Tuesday. And that is the end of our recommendations. We have only budget items for Tuesday, Bob. Next up is motions. We have in front of us, hearing the reports of boards and committees. We have to include, submitted by us. Article 2, salaries is a budget item. I think we need to wait until Tuesday to deal with that as part of the larger omnibus budget. Again, these are salaries of elected officials. Bob, you're in there, aren't you? Yep, $200.
Cut it.
Go around. Could be a selectman.
Could be a selectman. What is that, the old wimpy? I would gladly pay you for Wednesday.
For a hamburger today.
For a
that's
hamburger
right.
today, exactly right. Very good. So Article 3 is.
The motion would be to transfer from current year ambulance expense to fund that bill.
Okay, this is a bill to be paid, and it's gonna be coming from current year ambulance expenses. Okay. We don't have recommendations out of these for us. It's okay.
Your recommendations from the warrant are carried over on
Got
this,
it.
I apologize.
Got it. No trouble at all. Okay, so Article 3, action on this. We're moving to recommend the motion? Right, that's what we're doing here.
You could be doing that, yes.
What are we doing now?
Well, I'm asking about Article 3, right? Under the annual town meeting motions.
Yeah.
Because it identifies a funding source, the chair is asking
You
whether the
wanna
board
vote
wants to
again?
recommend.
No, I'm going through the language to make sure it's right. Right? Article 4, snow and ice.
You always confuse me this time of year,
well,
Mr. Chair.
I
Every
some-
year.
I thought we were,
I think
I thought
extra
we had to vote
voting is
against too. I was
good.
like,
Talk
Okay.
about paper, this is the town meeting warrant put
Yeah.
to us how many times?
I know. We're getting right to
It's
it,
like-
right?
It's getting to look like the federal budget.
Well, not
It's
quite.
not that hard.
So, Article 4, right?
Article 4 represents exact figures that we have as of today.
Okay,
You know,
There could be, there
No
could be
more
slight
snow.
changes in those numbers. The warrant is more, the warrant reflects a more ballpark figure to total $12,000.
Okay.
Okay,
let's hope that
12, or
doesn't go up anymore.
12,500, I should say now.
okay. Article 5 is the transfer of free cash, 12,000 for veterans' benefits in the current year. Article 6,
Okay, so that combines funding from the Town History Volume 3 Fund. It's a special revenue fund. That sum of $1,000 is the balance in that fund now.
Yep.
And then the remainder would be taken from free cash, and then you'll see at the end of the motion that all receipts from the sale of the publication would be put into the general fund and then revert to free cash,
got it,
okay?
okay. So that gives us our funding sources.
Right.
Article 7 is, we're gonna hold on, this is the teacher's retirement.
Yes.
And again, the backstory here is that we have an instructor, longtime instructor at the elementary, these are 3 instructors at the elementary school. One instructor was a carryover from last year, notification window was missed. And there's a notification inside of the current year that 2 teachers are retiring, so we are looking at a total of 3 instructors at a value of $83,000, $83,290. Historically, this has been incorporated in the elementary school's omnibus budget, and then added and removed in subsequent years, or added in some years and then absorbed in other years. It's really been very difficult to kind of pull it apart. The elementary school, the administration came to the town, and in discussions about this, notifying us this was coming up, the dialogue was about what's the best way of funding it. And at $83,000, the discussion came around that, well, can we have it can it be a separate warrant article as opposed to simply in the budget of $83,000? And here it is. This will be an area of great discussion because of the way it's being funded. This is really the first time we funded through a warrant article a retirement contractual obligation. Capture that correctly?
What does this money actually fund? It says retirement, but I'm sure that that's
Sure.
not their total retirement.
It's,
No.
it's contract payouts such as, I can't identify every one of them, so things such
Sick
as
time,
longevity and sick leave buyback and things like that, and there would be a number of contract benefits covered in this.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add to that, the Finance Committee, we received notice that the Finance Committee voted on Thursday night they would support funding this from stabilization, which would require money to be moved into stabilization, because the Finance Committee's intent is to not reduce the stabilization balance, so they would require, they would want to see money move from free cash to stabilization, and then stabilization fund this. The board currently has no article on the warrant to fund stabilization at all.
We've used that mechanism funding the capital budget the last couple of meetings. That's to have the discussion about the capital budget. I wonder if using 2/3 into stabilization and then a 2/3 out from stabilization for contracted obligation is the most appropriate mechanism. If dialogue is the goal, I'm sure there's gonna be some dialogue. And from town meeting's times perspective, if we only have free cash available to us, is it prudent to use up an additional warrant article to simply move money in and then back out? And I put that in the form of a question to the board and the moderator.
It's a good question, because in the end, it comes from the same spot.
You're preserving stabilization by not withdrawing from it.
Right. But you have to get out of free cash to get it into stabilization to preserve the stabilization in
Yeah,
the
it
first
would
place.
require, 2/3 vote both ways.
Right.
Why would you want to put it into stabilization? Because the quantum of the vote is higher,
That's the
And yet
one
it's a-
functional difference.
yet it's a contractual obligation, you have to pay it.
Do we need to hold off on this because of tomorrow's meeting anyway, until Tuesday?
Yeah, we may not have action on this with respect to tonight. However, I think it's important to have the first pass of the dialogue, in particular if the goal was to include, if there's discussion about including an additional warrant article, this closes on Monday.
Yeah, and today actually is it
Is
for the
it?
board,
Okay.
yeah, before the warrant needs to be
I
posted
don't
Friday.
see,
What does that buy at? I guess that's the question.
I don't, it's not coming to
From
me. When I
an
first-
accounting
yeah,
perspective, you know?
no, zero. From an accounting perspective?
I'm trying to think of like what, just to move it from here to here to here,
Right.
rather than here to here.
Tom, any thoughts?
Maybe, the finance committee hasn't, we know things today that we didn't know probably when they took their vote.
Nah, it could be. That is a good point.
And Margaret, if our audience,
Right.
will note that the school committee has been at they were at our last, the elementary school committee was at our last meeting.
Right.
We had a long discussion with them about the school budget. Marty and the superintendent and Patty and Margaret have had many conversations over the last couple weeks. I believe what we've heard is that the superintendent's ready to make a recommendation to the school committee and tomorrow night at their meeting. Plus, we've gotten some good news from the state about some monies coming back to the school, because the school had a bunch of unexpected budget payouts that they weren't expected. So I don't know if the finance committee was aware of all that
Yeah,
stuff
good point.
when it's happened, because it's been very fluid.
Good point.
And I think right now, if it didn't pass, then $82,000 would, it is a contract, so $82,000 would have to come out of either the town budget or the school budget.
Right.
And I know the town don't have $82,000
Anywhere,
after our cuts, so,
anywhere.
I mean, we haven't made up from, we
Anywhere.
haven't made up since from
2009.
2009.
That's right.
So I can't think about absorbing. And I'll tell you, we've worked with the school the last 3-4 weeks. And to tell you the truth, no one has come up with a better way of financing these. We all have ideas.
Right.
But any ideas that we haven't been, somebody said, aha, that's what we should do,
Yeah, no light bulb's gone off.
right? I mean, so I
That's
don't.
right, there's a whole,
Silver bullets, yeah.
So, and Scott, you're right, the costs have been absorbed. I'll say they've been absorbed in the school budget before, but I think they've used school choice funds, they've used, money, and there's monies that come into the school that we don't know, and I believe that's what Doug Fulton was saying the other day, is that there's a lot of, so it may not, it's.
not budgeted, it wasn't budgeted.
We know it came out, the $44,000 came out.
Right, it wasn't accounted for in a direct line item. in
That's
that
right.
sense.
So I think it's something that's aware.
Yeah.
And I think the retirements are gonna continue, so we have to find a way to handle this.
Yes,
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I don't agree that,
And not only handle it, but handle it in a way that lets us deal with the ups, the peaks and the troughs.
right.
That's
And I
really-
I don't know the answer yet. I'd rather work with than against. I think that's what we've said. And understanding, and this is the hard part, sometimes we may have differences of opinions on how something gets settled, and sometimes that's hard.
It's okay.
As long as it's focused on the practical.
Right.
It's
So
pretty easy.
I don't see how that would solve a purpose.
No, I don't see adding an article and then adding 2 steps to this.
Yeah, it doesn't really get us.
Right.
And it's not gonna change discussion, we're still gonna have a discussion.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I'm hearing is that we're not gonna include any additional articles on the annual town meeting warrant.
okay.
It was put forward as an idea by the finance committee, and I respect the work that they do and have done in the past, and hope they
I
continue to do.
don't disagree with them.
Right.
I just don't see it as a,
Okay, that's 83,000.
So that's a hold, correct?
That is going to be a hold until we have a financing,
so they're
funding
supposed to
source.
talk about that tomorrow?
Yes, that'll be one of the items that's discussed.
Okay.
So, motion 8 is $4,600 municipal technology audit, and what I hear is, I see here is it's funded from free cash?
The portion of it is funded from free cash, and
Yep.
that's to supplement a $5,000 grant the town has received for that.
Okay. Article 9 is, that's the motion with all of
right.
the monies. That one there is pretty clean, it didn't have any lines to be filled in. Article 10 is the annual budget, of course, so we're gonna hold on that. Article 11 is the special legislation allowing firefighter to stay in service. No funding sources there. Article 12, the motion is transfer of value of blank from free cash to capital stabilization. So again, I think we have to have that
Tuesday night.
Tuesday night. Is there any reason not to consider removing the article from the annual town meeting warrant if we know we're not gonna appropriate anything from there?
That could be done as late as tonight.
Right? I'm thinking about the grand scheme of things. We have about $394,000 in free cash.
You have a dollar in there right now, technically as a placeholder, right?
Not in the article,
Or-
no.
Not in the article, but in the account,
Oh,
isn't
to
it? Just to
fund-
keep
Yeah.
it,
There's, actually, we have a capital stabilization fund that
18.
currently has $19,527 in it.
okay,
Yeah, and there's a dollar placeholder on the operating budget.
right, that's what I
Yes.
was thinking, yeah.
So from a general strategy, Tom, I don't see how we're gonna get money in there. The question is, do we keep it on the annual town meeting warrant? And the subsequent motion. We can always pass them over, and I think it's a great teachable, it's a great opportunity to talk about programmatic funding.
Personally, I'd keep it there, Scott, and say, look, this year, and the number may be $10.
Okay.
But you have to make, I mean,
Keep doing it.
Yep.
capital, I mean, that's part of the budget.
Mhm.
And, you know, so if by taking it out, are we losing why it's there?
Yeah, or the opportunity to talk about
Right,
it.
you diminish its
Mhm.
importance to a
Good
certain
point,
extent.
David. Okay, I wanted to put that out there as we talk about warrants and
Mm.
articles and the fact that we can actually, tonight's the last night to taking action on it. Okay, so that again,
So-
a value we can come across with, if there's anything that comes out on
We'll plug a
Tuesday.
number in there Tuesday night, Margaret.
2250.
For Article 12 on the warrant, that has to be posted this week. Do you want to say a sum or sums of money, as legal counsel suggests, or do you want to plug in some number?
No, I think
The
a
sum or sums is probably
sum
better.
or
A
sums.
sum or sums
then
of
it
money.
comes out of the motion would be the value.
Yeah.
Right.
Right?
Okay,
I mean, that's a good catch, Margaret, because right now, the warrant has a dollar value.
right, and same thing with Article 13. A sum or sums of money,
Same language in the warrant article.
right.
Well, I guess it begs the question, if it is a sum or sums of money and we're gonna rely on the motion, is there a reason that the board wouldn't take action on Article 12 and the warrant to recommend a sum or sums of money? The same thing with 13? We're not actually plugging dollar values
That's
in
right,
at
now
this
you're not
point.
It's just
plugging
a
dollar values in.
recommendation.
Right, you're only recommending that money be moved in there, and you're picking it up in the motion.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember that much.
Okay,
Okay, is there a recommendation for the town meeting warrant article number 12?
Motion.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
3-0, please. And it's-
And you should, and we need to go right through, you know, to explain, typically, this is what, you know,
Absolutely.
percent. I mean, you can explain that, Scott.
Oh, I think that's really, really important, because again, we don't wanna miss an opportunity to have a teachable moment. And if everybody says no, well, at least we recognize that the need is
Right.
still there, and we keep bringing it forward.
And everybody has said no.
I think you have to, we have to help, show what's happening with the budget.
Absolutely right.
It's our responsibility, really. I mean, whether it gets voted up or down is irrelevant
The
in a
good
way.
stuff and the bad stuff.
That's why we're paid the ridiculous sum we are.
That's right. We'd be irresponsible to ignore it.
Ridiculous.
Article 13 then, the same way, we're changing it so it reads sum or sums of money, it will now have a value. Motion's made, is there a second?
Second.
Motion's made and seconded, all those in favor of recommending the warrant article?
Aye.
3-0, please.
so here's a question for the board. You were going to hold on the budget article.
Yep.
Which does not give sums, exact sums of money, and the board does have to bring a budget to
Yep.
town meeting, so would you like to make the recommendation on the warrant article? The warrant article, not the motion.
Yeah, we started down that slippery slope, didn't we, by that
Yeah.
first?
See what you
What do
started?
You want a recommendation on the budget?
No, on the warrant article that says
You want a recommendation?
a recommendation, right. That would finish out,
I don't see how,
which one's the budget?
How are you gonna make a recommendation if we don't know what we're saying?
yeah, the values,
Well, what you're saying in the article, this is just the general warrant article, it's to raise and appropriate, transfer from available funds, or otherwise provide the sum or sums of money for town and general municipal purposes connected
But we
therewith.
don't know what the budget is yet.
That's right, the warrant doesn't give that number.
Yeah, I think-
I mean, if you want to leave that recommendation blank, that's fine, it's just,
No.
there's no budget number associated with the warrant
Right.
article.
I know where you were going there. Thematically, it can be said that we just did some or sums of money. I understand that completely, but I think we should hold off until Tuesday on that one.
Okay, so we're gonna leave that recommendation blank on the warrant, and that'll be held for the motions.
Yep. Okay.
Okay.
And so the capital stabilization discussion we did, that's 12 and 13. 14 is the bylaws for dog control. Bob, you ready to speak to this?
I've talked with Wendy, it's perfect.
Good.
It's gonna be the hot topic of the night,
That's right.
so.
And then, of course, next we have the amended the Code of Sunderland. This is the planning board article
Well, by petition.
by petition.
Yep.
Well, yep.
Second.
And then we have the Article 16 is the citizens petition that's gonna be withdrawn.
Yep.
So the intent of the citizens petition was to trigger this conversation. The planning board worked really well with citizen, got through the concerns, and then the citizens petition is to be withdrawn. Okay, then we have zoning bylaw proposed, again, large-scale solar job, pretty straightforward planning board work, a little bit of a strike-through work, a little bit of italicizing, and nothing else there. And then 18 is the CPAs, which we just did. 19 is CPA, which we just voted. 20 is CPA, no language changes. 21 is the town clerk, again, recommended. 22, front steps, dialogue there. 23, CPA for conceptual, for the
Like that.
bike and walkways. 24,
The whole,
appropriation for the upcoming year. Designations, I'm sorry, not appropriation, designations for the upcoming year. And then consents. Bob, any questions on the motions? Anything jump out? So we have in front of us about 30 warrant articles this year.
yes. So the board's hold, just wanna make sure that I'm clear on this. Article 10, budget, is a hold until Tuesday. Article 24, the CPA, whatever you called those, the estimated revenues and set-asides, that's a hold. Article 2 on the motions, that's elected official salaries, that's a hold until Tuesday. Article 7, teacher retirements is a hold until Tuesday. Article 10, the budget is a hold. Article 12, funding to capital stabilization is a hold, and then Article 13, capital budget is a hold. On the motions.
On the motions,
Yes.
correct. Those are dollar values.
Yep.
Okay. Next up, questions about the warrant or motions, Bob? What do you think?
9:30.
What happened to the idea that when
Yeah.
we paid the school off, you were gonna be afloat in money?
No, your tax rate was gonna drop.
Right.
Because it actually, a tax rate is actually going to drop, your tax rate by 1,029 cents? I think we
I
did
think you're
this,
right,
did
yeah.
this last
I think that was
2 weeks ago.
about-
29 cents
I have
because
the
it's
sheet.
excluded debt.
Oh, okay.
So it's not a function of the operating budget, it's actually a function of operating outside of the, of 2.5.
Right.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. And actually, that's one piece this year, that if the capital stabilization override, passes, still is a reduction in the tax rate.
I was just gonna, thank you for mentioning it.
And
I
then-
was just gonna say
yeah,
that, so.
still a
we can Still
reduction.
pass that and still get a tax
Still
cut.
get a tax reduction.
Yep.
And then the first of the year, there is the well, as we buy off, it won't be the first of the year, it'll be after July 1st. This time next year, there'll be another reduction as a supplemental bond is bought out.
Yeah.
Super.
It's our job. Okay, next up, minutes of the 7th.
Motion.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded, adopt the minutes of the 7th, all those in favor?
Aye.
3-0, please. We have a meeting next Monday, we have a meeting next Tuesday, 7 o'clock to talk about the remaining warrant article motions, again, specific to the, numbers. That's the numbers meeting. We have about 5 of them. There is a elementary school committee meeting tomorrow, where they're going to, not only carry on the regular business, but also, take a look again at their budget. And that's prior to the annual town meeting. Are there any board updates?
Not this week.
Town administrator updates?
Budget time.
I think the one thing I have from last week is, the highway superintendent and I attended, the Franklin County
Tip.
Transit Planning Organization meeting last Thursday. I found it really interesting.
We need to stay
We
in the
had a
game.
chance to advocate for the North Main Street reconstruction project. Sunderland is competing with, Coleraine, Buckland, believe it or not, a Mass DOT project in Deerfield, a state project in Deerfield, the town of Orange.
Right.
And so there's a lot of competition for a small pot of money. Given the presentations that were made, I think Sunderland's project has a lot of features the state would be looking at. A lot of healthy transit features is what the state's looking at now. But I intend to go to the meeting in May, because I'd like to hear the continued discussion among that group's members.
So, yeah, we're gonna compete against Mass DOT and the district project.
Yeah, it was quite interesting, especially the conversation on the amount that each community has been able to fund for its engineering commitment. And just about all the towns are in the same position Sunderland is. We're either at pre-contract stage, design stage, or pre-25% design. The Mass DOT project happens to be at 75% design because it's a state project that can afford to fund engineering. I think it's incredibly interesting that small municipalities have to compete with Mass DOT on these projects. So that's one of the things I found most enlightening about the meeting.
Huh.
Because you're already handicapped right from the get-go,
Yeah.
based on your engineering
They're
funding.
trying to keep up with the rich neighbor.
Right, exactly.
Richie?
What is the project in Deerfield?
It's a 5 and 10 project. It's 5 and 10 resurfacing, pedestrian access.
So we'll beat them out. Dump?
I would just like to say we do I beat up on the state all the time. And I will continue, but when they do something good, whenever that happens, we do like to make an announcement. And I think we just got notification that Governor Patrick was putting $40 million back into, because of the bad year. 30 million was 10 million was going to Mass Highway and 30 million was going to the cities and towns. And Sunderland was notified to get a letter on for April 9th, and we are notified that we will have additional approximately $28,000 to use on projects that basically like Chapter 90 money.
Right. It's
So the
pothole
money-
projects, they said.
So it was very interesting, but when it was first announced, there was many highway superintendents that were very skeptical about the money, them never able to, or come a lot of strings attached, but it doesn't look like there's a lot of string attached. But they are.
It has to be used by a certain date, really, that's
Right,
a
but they want,
tight deadline.
you could say you can use it for line striping, catch basin,
Yeah.
guardrails that have been damaged. I mean,
There's plenty of potholes to repair.
On top of
I
it.
mean, that's,
or resurfacing, there's
Right.
resurfacing, so you can use the money, so.
this was one of the most brutal winters, as somebody who spends
Yeah.
a lot of time on the road.
So the state did come
You
through.
know.
That's good.
Richie?
Has there been any discussion with Western Mass Electric about the
Yes.
Continuing discussions.
47?
Well, the neighbors say they like it because it's a nice speed bump.
I hate it.
We don't need speed
Oh, that's why
bumps.
the neighbors like it. Slows Richie down.
Okay, anything else for tonight?
I hope I didn't imply that I'm faulting DOT for this. It's the way the process works.
No, it's
No,
a
it's
process.
just that we
It's not-
are-
Right, it has nothing to do with the
Picking a
merits
fight now,
of.
Margaret.
I don't want to pick any fights.
I can just see the
it's just
headlines in the
interesting
paper
the way.
tomorrow. Sunderland Town Administrator wraps DOT.
Administrator
No,
jeopardizes
It's not
project.
DOT's fault,
That's
it's the
right,
way the
right.
system
With the way
works.
our articles get presented in the newspaper.
That's right, probably won't be right.
Sunderland Town Administrator loves Mass DOT.
There you go.
Yeah. Raves
Very
about
good.
$16 million resurfacing
Hey, Dave,
project.
Okay, any other
keep doing
discussion?
those crosswalks.
If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
You have a motion made and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Tom, I'm gonna take next year and I'm gonna remind the chair that we don't have to vote on motions. It's like, some years I get it right, some years I get it wrong, I'm like, ugh.
I know. And thank you for sending in
I
that
think it's a
correction
hoot.
email, because I was reading the article too, and I'm like,
Well, every other, some
we
years,
didn't
some
have
years
an
I get it
override
right,
then.
some years I'm like,
And
well,
we,
wait a
but,
minute, we have to
right,
vote on
and
these,
the
right?
last balanced budget was, I'm like, no.
Yeah, you gotta be kidding me.
No.
The entire last paragraph, I was like, where'd this come from?